Hello everyone, welcome back to Develop. I am Parvathi and I am really excited today because we are talking about something very close to my heart. When we talk about India's development journey, there is one word that keeps coming up again and again: NGOs. And here is the thing: how many of us really know what it means? Why do they actually exist? And how do these NGOs shape our society? That is what we'll unpack in this episode today. So, let's take a leap together into understanding NGOs. NGOs or non-governmental organizations are simply group of people who have come together not just for profit but for a certain cause. They are also called as the alternative development agents. Why? Because they bring in a bottom up approach into their grassroots level work, and they also bring in deep insights about the community. NGOs are also part of what is often called the third sector, which means they are not just government or businesses, but they lie somewhere in between these two. They are also much more diverse. There are formal NGOs, a few exist as informal ones, and sometimes they are even semi governmental in nature. But what matters at the end of the day is that they all exist to serve the public interest. So, what exactly makes an NGO unique in its practice? Let's break it down. First, they follow a formal structure. It's not like they're just a group of friends coming together to contribute to the society. NGOs are registered with certain rules to follow and a sense of accountability to their work. Most NGOs register as societies or trust under the laws like Society Registration Act of 1860. This gives them a legal identity and an access to grants. So, if they want foreign funding, they might need an FCRA clearance. That is the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, which basically is a government permit that says, yes, you are eligible to receive money from abroad. Secondly, the NGOs are not for profit. Even if they earn money through a project, it is mostly recycled back into their mission and its functioning. And most importantly, they possess a certain kind of freedom. They're not controlled by government or political parties. That kind of autonomy is exactly what gives them the flexibility and the ability to respond to communities faster than the bureaucracy. And the most beautiful part is that the NGOs are value driven. People working in NGOs often work with a motivation which is driven not just by money but by meaning. They act as catalysts working with the communities, not just for them. So, now that we know what makes NGOs unique, it is important to see where these ideas actually came from in India's history of development. In India, volunteerism is not something new. It is as old as our civilization. Let's think of dana, that is the act of giving, or even seva, which means service, right? All these concepts were embedded in our social and cultural life from long back. During ancient and medieval times, there were communities who have built schools together and they have dug up wells, even helped each other during floods and famines. All these happened voluntarily. In colonial times, this exact spirit took a new shape, and that led to the emergence of reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Rai and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. They used voluntary association to fight social evils like sati and child marriage that existed then. And there were also Christian missionaries who set up schools and hospitals at that times. Later, when Mahatma Gandhi came, he gave volunteerism a whole new vision. His ideas of Swadeshi, self reliance, decentralization, these weren't just political, they were also deeply developmental. Post independence was the period when the government itself recognized this voluntary spirit by creating the Central Social Welfare Board in 1953 to fund NGOs. And by the 70s and 80s, as India struggled with poverty and drought, a new wave of professional NGOs emerged, and it was often supported by foreign funds. They worked mostly focusing on women, children, and marginalized communities. And what happened from the 1990s onwards is that the whole sector started to grow. Today, in India, it is said to have one of the largest networks of NGOs in the whole world. Some estimates even put it at nearly one NGO for every 400 people in this country. Imagine that. Yes, of course, not all of them are equally active or effective, but it does tell us something. India's civil society is massive, and within this massive world, NGOs themselves are incredibly diverse. See, some NGOs are charity driven. Think of food distribution or relief work that happens during flood or other natural disasters. There are some which act as service providers. They may be running schools, health centers, or even conducting training programs. And then there are those that focus on empowerment, maybe building the capacities of women collectives, self help groups, or youth organizations. Some NGOs work directly at the grassroots level. Others may act as support organizations, building the capacities of smaller NGOs. And there are some big umbrella networks like WANI, the Voluntary Action Network India, which connects NGOs across the country. And of course, there are funding NGOs, advocacy NGOs, and many more. But to keep it simple, some NGOs might deliver services, some might build systems, some might even fight for policy change. By looking at these different kinds of NGOs makes us wonder, with such variety, what role do they actually play in India today? Which leads us to the most important part of our conversation today. Why do NGOs matter? Why, in a country with such a large government machinery, do we still need them? The truth is, development in India is very uneven. Yes, we have seen economic growth, but millions remain excluded, especially women, children, Dalits, and other marginalized groups. To put it in perspective for you, as recently as 2023, India was ranked 130th on the Human Development Index, which also gives away the fact that about 4 in 10 children under the age of 5 in India are undernourished. It also means that many young lives and futures are being held back. These are the kinds of situations where NGOs step in. They go where the state often doesn't reach: remote villages, marginalized slums, communities ignored by mainstream policies. NGOs don't just fill gaps, they are the ones who often raise the right questions. And beyond their service delivery, they complement the state. They innovate, they experiment, they show what works on the ground. And sometimes, even government programs start to scale up those models. So, if you ask me, India's development journey does not move forward without NGOs. They are the indispensable part of India's development. And Now that we know what NGOs are and why they exist, let's talk about what they actually do in our society. At one level, NGOs are service providers. They provide education, they are concerned with health, and they even tries to fill in wherever the government or market fail to reach. But the role of NGOs goes much deeper than that. NGOs are also advocates. They raise their voice when communities can't. Whether it's child labor laws, women rights, or environmental protection, many of the policies that we take for granted today first came up because civil society organizations pushed for them. NGOs are also like watchdogs. Think of them as citizens' CCTV camera, keeping an eye on how the funds are being spent. They question the corporate and government's accountability to make sure the powerful doesn't forget the powerless. And sometimes NGOs are culture keepers. There is an organization called Speak Make that keeps Indian classical music alive by connecting young people with artists. That is also development work in its own way. And each and every role these NGOs play makes our democracy just a little more stronger. Of course, with all these important roles, you might think NGOs have it all figured out. But the truth is, the sector itself faces some serious challenges. The very first challenge that NGOs has to tackle with is their funding. Many NGOs survive on donations and grants, which often come with strings attached. They might require flashy success stories under unrealistic timelines. Especially the developing NGOs find it hard to sustain along these demands. Then there is the problem of credibility. For every genuine organization that there are also those NGOs who were set up just to get grants. And when a very few misuse funds, the whole sector comes under suspicion. There is also the challenge of autonomy. Let's say an NGO is depending too much on government funding. Can it still criticize policies openly? I know it will be a tough balance. And sometimes NGOs also face cultural resistance. Remember the Jallikattu protest that happened in Tamil Nadu? Many people felt that outside NGOs like PETA were interfering with their tradition. So, legitimacy of an NGO also comes from being rooted in local culture, not just the global causes. Yet, despite these challenges, NGOs continue to make real change on the ground. Let me share a few examples of how NGOs work together. There are support networks like ours which brings together over 600 autonomous voluntary agencies and NGOs which are working to improve the lives of rural communities in India. And on the ground, you can see organizations like SEVA, the Self Employed Women's Association, which helps women get microfinance and build their livelihoods. Even big international agencies like the Asian Development Bank partners with these local NGOs because they know one thing that these organizations have the trust of the people and the community, and that trust is priceless. So, for young professionals like you and me, this sector is not just about jobs, it is also about the meaning. Whether you join an NGO, volunteer, or even start your own someday, you are stepping into a space where every small act counts. Remember, change doesn't always begin with grand policies. Sometimes it starts within an NGO worker building rapport with the village and asking them, "What do you need?" So, as you think about the journey of NGOs, ask yourself, what does impact mean to me? And how can I take a leap, however small, towards building a more compassionate and just world? Thank you for staying with me on this episode of Develop. If this made you rethink NGOs, share it with a friend or colleague because that's how small conversation spark big changes. You can also subscribe and follow us on YouTube and Instagram to keep our dialogue going. Until next time, this is Parvati signing off. Stay curious, stay aware, and keep leaping forward.